Welcome to Island Watch Podcast, which was originally going to be a Gilligan's Island podcast, but let's just say we set out on a 3-hour tour and the weather started getting rough. Listen on, all will become clear.
Each week, we visit a different island by watching movies and TV shows. I'm Dave Zarg.
And I'm Gemma Voss.
All aboard. Let's set sail in the Pacific for Gilligan's Island. And this week, Island Watch focuses on Gilligan's Island.
So Dave, for people that have never seen Gilligan's Island, and I guess there's some in the world, in North America, it's one of those things that if you turn on the TV, you're probably going to see a rerun. But for people who haven't seen it, can you just describe the show?
Well, it's really all in the song if you hear the opening credits. It's about a group of tourists who go for a sightseeing tour from the Hawaiian Islands on a 3-hour tour. But a storm knocks them off course and they find themselves shipwrecked on a deserted island with no luxuries, no lights, no motor cars, not a single luxury. And they have to learn together and hope that they'll get rescued.
No motor cars. That doesn't seem like a big disadvantage on a deserted island. I feel like a motor car would be good for what? Sleeping in? Maybe turning into
a shelter, perhaps. I don't know. Yeah.
But no luxuries except for the fact that they've got tons of luggage with them. A radio. Anyway.
Yeah, they certainly do have some modern conveniences. The show was created by a producer named Sherwood Schwartz, and when he described the show, he said it was about that it would emphasize broad humor and slapstick comedy, and that's certainly what it did, I think, and I certainly remember watching this show together. But
when I was a little kid, this was funny to me, and I guess it was because of the slapstick, but slapstick humor is about making somebody hurt, really. I mean, there always has to be kind of a victim in slapstick.
I think it may have appealed to the young minds that we were back then, but seeing it as an adult, yes, it certainly does look a bit different.
Well, it had that other world fantasy kind of thing going on, right? Like in this episode, for example, one of the things that I liked was that when they're building a raft to try their very first attempt at escaping the island, which over the course of 99 episodes, which we did not watch all of, but having seen the show in the past, I remember that they're never actually successful in getting away. But one of the things I liked in this episode was the professor, one of the characters, makes a whole bunch of hardware products for Skipper and Gilligan to try and build a raft. So he makes glue out of mangoes and he makes sealant out of coconut. I can't remember all the details, but basically Gilligan winds up eating all of the professor's creations.
And that's just one example of the silly kind of lighthearted humor that they're going for.
But when you're a kid, to think that practical things can be made and then eaten, I mean, that's the same kind of like wonderment that you get out of reading a book like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, right? Where these very practical and mechanistic is the word I'm trying to say, things can be made by adults, but through like the wonder of looking at it as a kid. Maybe it's edible, maybe it's made by elves at night. It's all the magical kind of thinking, and I think that's maybe what captured me as a kid with this show.
I think for me what captured it was just this idea of the people who are trapped but living together, and it seemed like they were having lots of fun even though they were supposedly without any luxuries. They didn't really seem to suffer that much. They seemed to have a pretty good life there. And maybe it was kind of the escapist part of it that appealed to me as a kid. But
that's true, yeah. the only suffering they really had was making each other miserable and screwing up on the rescue attempts. But like life itself on the island is pretty idyllic.
I think it's interesting too, this cross section of these characters. I mean, who are these people on the island, and how do they learn to live together?
They're not exactly from a common background. I think we have a clip from the first episode that describes who's on the island. Why don't we play that?
And there still is no word on the fate of the passengers and crew who were aboard the small sightseeing boat, the SS Minnow, when she sailed last Tuesday from Honolulu Harbor for a 3-hour island cruise. The crew consisted of a young first mate named Gilligan. His skipper, Jonas Grumby, is an old salt in these waters. The passenger list included one of the world's wealthiest men, billionaire Thurston Howell III, and his socially prominent wife, the international hostess Lovey Howell. Also aboard the missing boat were Miss Mary Ann Summers of Winfield, Kansas, and Miss Ginger Grant of Hollywood. Mary Ann Summers, an attractive young brunette, is employed at the Winfield General Store. Glamorous Ginger Grant, according to friends, boarded the boat after a nightclub singing engagement, still wearing the evening dress from her last performance. The final member of the missing group was Professor Roy Hinckley, research scientist and well-known scoutmaster. Hope for their survival grows dim.
Well, when you hear about these characters, it raises a number of questions for me, right? And that it points out, too, that the premise really is kind of ridiculous. As you mentioned earlier about having luggage with them, the millionaire couple, why do they have all their luggage with them? And why are they even on a little tour boat called the Minnow?
They're literally on a boat named after pretty much the smallest fish that has a name. And they're supposed to be wealthy beyond imagining. It's weird, right? I mean, it's funny, but it's a fun premise to play with. There's also Ginger, the movie star, and for some reason she's doing live gigs in, I guess, Honolulu. um, uh, I guess maybe she's between movies or something. Anyway, she's just played a gig and now she's gone straight from the gig onto the boat in her glamorous movie star attire.
Kind of makes you wonder what she's running from, maybe. I don't know.
Well, right. Like, it feels like 3 of the 6 passengers seem like they're on the lam. It's funny. It's funny. It's a funny premise, but the the problem gets into the fact that, okay, I think you read somewhere that Sherwood Schwartz said he created these characters as archetypes. Is that right?
Yeah. According to a quote I found on IMDb, it said that the 7 castaways were archetypes of the 7 deadly sins. Gilligan represented sloth, Skipper was wrath, the professor pride, Mr. Howell was greed, Mrs. Howell gluttony, Ginger was lust, and Mary Ann was envy. I don't really see that, though. I think that's stretching things quite a bit, perhaps.
Do you think Sherwood Schwartz really said that, or do you think that's a concept somebody came up with later?
I think that's just something that somebody came up with. And really, I think probably these characters, they're not really archetypes. They're more kind of like stereotypes. For example, the professor, right? The smart, intelligent one, a well-respected scientist and internationally renowned scout leader. He seems to be pretty educated, and what exactly does one need to do to become recognized as a scout leader in that day and age?
It's a strange one. Stereotypes, I mean, one of the biggest problems I had with this show and didn't want to go forward with watching more episodes other than like slaking my initial curiosity of what this show was like watching it as an adult. The relationship between Gilligan and the skipper. Okay, when you go back to the 7 deadly sins concept and Skipper is wrath, like I see that. I don't think Gilligan is slothful. Gilligan is always hopping to work because the skipper's yelling at him all the time. Like if the skipper were my boss, I would, yeah, no. He's horrible. He's a horrible boss, right?
Yeah, Gilligan's always working hard, and he's doing his best. He is a bit of a klutz, and it's a common plot device in the show that any attempt at rescue gets foiled by just Gilligan's incompetence or klutziness. But he's good-hearted, and he tries hard, and he's the one who really seems to do all the work around the island. The skipper is more of a yell at your employee and don't ever actually do anything yourself.
He's a barker. He just barks orders and he micromanages. He doesn't ever seem to teach Gilligan anything. I mean, like, yes, Gilligan is incompetent, but then why not try and work with him to get some improvement in how he works? It's just, I mean, I know it's played for laughs. I get it. It's not funny. So that was one of the problems I had with the show. Mr. and Mrs. Howell themselves are charming AF. Like, I gotta say, whenever Mr. and Mrs. Howell show up on the screen, I kind of breathe a sigh of relief. Partly it's because those two actors are really good. They know what they're doing.
To the extent that there's wordy humor in this show, I think it's often the scenes involving one or both of them. Whereas with Gilligan and Skipper, it's more the slapstick and the barking by the skipper. I think a really good example of that humor of Thurston and Lovey is this clip from this first episode. Let's listen to that now.
Oh, dash it all, Lovey, I've three-putted again.
Well, I think you're doing very well, dear, considering you're using a clamshell on a bamboo stick for a putter.
Not to mention an avocado pit for a ball. Here, I'll try it again. Mr. Howell. Quiet, please.
But Mr. Howell.
Shh, Professor. Mr. Howell is putting.
I know, but I've got important news.
Not while I'm putting.
Mr. Howell, I believe the Marubi may be here.
I don't care who's here, they are not playing through.
They may be slumming here on the island, but they're going to make the best of it because they don't want to give up their standard of living. And in doing so, they're going to provide some of the more enjoyable humor, and I think maybe more timeless kind of humor of the show. Whereas a lot of the slapstick and other more kind of stereotypical kind of humor is not aging well.
I mean, there's still issues with the Howells. I mean, they are completely clamped into a 1% outlook on the world, right? Like, they just, everything they see is everybody else is there to serve them. In the escape attempt in this episode, Thurston goes to Skipper and Gilligan. Oh, well, actually, it's Thurston and Lovey. Go to Gilligan and Skipper with a basically list of things they need them to do immediately when they find help. One of them is sending an apology to someone or other because they weren't able to attend a party. It's like, yeah, okay, your priorities are not the priorities of everyone else on the island. And that's where some of the comedy comes from. But I just think I admire those two actors. The actor that plays Mr. Howell was actually also the voice of Mr. Magoo. And I'm almost shell-shocked after watching these episodes of Gilligan's Island because I'm like, what if everything I watched as a kid was this, like, racist, classist, sexist, all the ists? Like I said, nostalgia is not the sunshiny thing that we might think it is. And it can be a little squirmy to revisit this time because it ...
Yes, I had that feeling myself. Though it was a bit uncomfortable watching this at times when it seems to be pretty sexist, and of course there are lots of references to savages who live on various islands, and of course in this episode they find some artifacts of a Pacific Island culture, and the people are described as headhunters and savages that these white travelers need to be afraid of.
Yeah, no time are they ever presented as sympathetic characters. They're always something to be feared.
So that certainly dates a show like this, and and does make it a bit uncomfortable to watch from this perspective.
Yeah. I mean, I looked up because I was just kind of curious about the times that this show came out in. And maybe 10 years or so before this show came out, there was an explosion of something called tiki culture, which is still kind of around. The nicest thing I can say about tiki culture is it exoticized people who, for example, lived on Pacific Islands, right? But I think that might be where some of this, like, I think that was part of the zeitgeist, let's put it that way. It doesn't make it right. But I'm trying to understand where this stuff came from. And then, when I'm looking back at that seven deadly sin concept, which I think is kind of interesting, even though I don't think it fits with every character. If Ginger is equated with lust, she is the most Virgin Mary like lustful figure that you can imagine. Because also during this time, the actress that played Ginger, her name was Tina Louise, and she would try and pull her bodice down a little bit on her very modest dress. But there were codes in effect for TV that, for example, Marianne, I think you told me this, Marianne wasn't allowed to display her belly button. She often wore like kind of tank tops and shorts, and at no time could she show her belly button. Tina Louise is...
Actually, she was able to show it at times, but I think it was referred to as the intermittent belly button rule, that it couldn't be constantly shown. So you would see it
like a traffic light.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, certainly from a 21st century perspective.
Right. I mean, imagine if that were your job, determining how many times in this edit of this show are we going to be able to show the belly button and when. Like, what? What a crazy task, right? So same thing with Tina Louise's cleavage. She would try and like pull down her bodice to show a little bit more, and the producers would be like, no, can't do that, can't show it, pull your dress up kind of thing. And it's not like she was letting it all hang out by any stretch of the imagination. It wasn't a wardrobe malfunction situation. She was, supposed to be playing a glamorous movie star. I think she was going with that. Yeah, those are almost the least of the issues. The bit in the clip that we heard earlier, the radio describing the castaways on the island, just the descriptions of the characters. I mean, yes, it's for exposition in the show, but talking about Marianne being an attractive brunette shopkeeper, it's like, yeah, you wouldn't get away with that today. And really...
Exactly. Imagine hearing a news report naming the passengers on a ship that has disappeared, and why that would be an important detail to include at all. I mean, it would be ridiculous. But I guess it was done for, as you say, for part of the exposition of the show. And given the times and the function of those female characters, right, that it was considered appropriate and maybe even important to list them that way. But it sounds pretty silly now.
Yeah. So remember, in the song, it lists the characters. The song that I remembered listed all the characters' names, and actually the first season that isn't a thing. It talks about the millionaire and his wife, the movie star, and the rest, which is hilarious. I think that's such a hilarious lyric. It doesn't name the professor and Marianne like most people remember.
Yeah, I remember that as a kid, that was different in the first season than in the second season. I mean, it's not that there was a huge cast of characters and that it would have, extended the song a whole lot to name them, which clearly they were able to do in year two. But interestingly, apparently they made the change in season 2, and that was at the insistence of the show's main star, Bob Denver, that he insisted that the network name all of the cast members.
Well, good on him, because that must have felt kind of not that great.
Exactly, because if you look at sort of the size of the roles in terms of screen time in each episode, I mean, the Professor and Marianne were just as involved as any of the other cast members, so it didn't make sense to treat their characters as any less than the other five.
Would you say that Professor and Marianne are sort of like the smart ones? I mean, I think all of them are smart in their own ways, right? Like they know different things. But Marianne was played by Dawn Wells, and Dawn Wells herself actually had a good amount of smarts because she's the only one of the cast who asked for her contract to be amended from how it was given. And she wound up getting residuals beyond what was the standard of the time, which was just the first broadcast and 5 repeats of the show. She actually had it in her contract that she would get residuals beyond that. So she probably made a bit more money than everybody else in the end.
And that's fortunate because, I mean, the actors weren't highly paid on TV in those days. And those first 5 rebroadcasts, because of the popularity of this show, happened pretty soon. So that stream of money, such that it was, didn't last long for the other actors. And also, with the similar problem faced by a lot of actors who are really well known for a particular role, especially on TV, then it's hard to get other roles. They tend to be typecast. So it actually kind of limited their future earnings without really compensating them, considering that this show made lots and lots of money for the studio that owned it.
Ironically, they were playing archetypes, stereotypes, whatever angle you want to look at it, and because of that, they were so typecast that they never could play any other roles really. I mean, I think every time I saw Bob Denver ever pop up on a show, you were like, hey, that's Gilligan. And I think you said the same thing happened with the Professor.
Yeah, and I remember Dawn Wells. I remember seeing ads for her being in like dinner theater type productions and that. Not that there's anything wrong with that, right? It is acting, but I think that the main thing here is that they probably should have been better compensated for the work that they created, albeit it's not high art, but it made a lot of money, and they should have got, I think, to share in a bit more of the profits of that.
So one of the cast actually made out pretty well, not from the show, but from some real estate investments in the 1930s. Do you want to take a guess?
Well, I suspect it would probably be one of the older actors on the show, either Jim Backus or Natalie Schaefer.
Right. It's not the millionaire, it's the wife. So she actually was a millionaire in real life. She invested with her husband at the time in the 1930s. They invested in Beverly Hills real estate properties, and they took in millions of dollars. And she was born in 1900, Natalie Schaefer was, Lovey Howell in the show. And when she died in 1991, she was able to bequeath somewhere between $1.5 million and $2 million to a hospital. And even had a wing of the hospital actually renamed after her. And there's some talk about she maybe spent the last few years of her life with Dawn Wells, taking care of her. It's not really clear, but it seems like that was a pretty close relationship. Another thing I found out about Natalie Schaefer that was pretty cool was that most of the actors on the show didn't do their own stunts, which fair enough. There's some pretty physical stuff happening on there, but she refused to have a stunt person. So when you see her jumping into lagoons or sinking in quicksand, like all the other misadventures they had, that's really her doing it. And she's in her mid-60s at the time. So I thought that was a pretty kick-ass fact about Natalie Schaefer.
Kudos to her.
Mm-hmm. One more Natalie Schaefer fact, because as you can tell, I'm kind of a fan. She thought when she got offered the role of the millionaire's wife in the pilot that it was basically a one and done acting job. And she just didn't think that the premise of the show was enough, like strong enough to be made into a full series. And I have to say, she was right.
Well, except, of course, it did end up in the series. And I read that she really just wanted the free trip to Hawaii, which was where the pilot was shot. Of course, when it went to series, it was shot on the studio lot with an artificial lagoon
Yeah.
and trees stuck on a soundstage. But she got at least a free trip to Hawaii to make that pilot.
That's awesome. Why not? But I think the fact that, like some people say we're now in the golden age of TV, looking back on this show, one of the reasons we decided not to make this into a Gilligan's Island podcast or just doing one episode of it instead of the whole show is that there's not a lot of meat there. There's not a lot to chew over or consider. It's a straight up slapstick, like laugh in the moment kind of show, but one that we also found had so much racist, sexist, like we discussed, all the ists in it, that it kind of took away the joy that we remembered from watching it when we were kids. So I'm sorry if I'm squashing anybody's bubble a bit. Maybe not sorry. I think this is a show that had its course, ran its time, but really, there's lots of other things that could be filling the airwaves now instead of Gilligan's Island. And wouldn't it be cool if somebody did a redo of this series, but got rid of the junk, got rid of the crap? I would watch that.
It would have to look a lot different, and I think it would look a lot different just in terms of the setting and how they treat these different topics, so that the cast would need to be more representative, and also just the way TV shows are made. I mean, this show made through almost 100 episodes was pretty formulaic, right? I mean, they never got off the island during the original run of the show. They never happened to be rescued, even though they end up meeting lots of people who come to the island, but somehow this castaways never quite get rescued. So it's pretty formulaic, and of course there wasn't an overarching kind of story arc the way most series have now. So it doesn't really merit the kind of episode by episode analysis or review and the scene by scene kind of revisitation and recounting, because there's not a lot of meat there, as you say. There's, in terms of plot or character development or overarching themes, there's just not really enough to make a whole podcast out of.
It's time to play Find the Island. With so many islands in the world, it's a challenge, kind of a wonderful challenge, to figure out which one to visit. To get to know the islands of the world better, we created this Find the Island segment. Maybe it will help choose which islands to visit, either in person or on a future episode of Island Watch. Here's how to play. One of us gives a series of clues about an island, and the other tries to work out what island it is. Best of all, you can play along at home, either by staring into space with no idea or shouting out the answers and calling us idiots for not getting to the answer sooner. Sound like fun? It's Dave's turn to highlight an island.
Okay, let's start. First clue. Europeans were the first humans to arrive here. There's no evidence of an indigenous population, and according to historical reports, it was first sighted in 1502. Other accounts say 1503 and suggest that maybe the 1502 sighting was actually a different island.
Okay, thank you for narrowing it down between 1502 and 1503, because that's really helpful to me. Okay, I don't know.
Okay, that's all right. Number 2. Its population is about 5,000 people. In fact, the population was shrinking in the 1980s because of outmigration, but it's actually risen a bit in the last decade. And the largest community of expats from this island is in Swindon, in Wiltshire, England.
Okay, so there's a random British connection.
Yeah.
Still not
Okay.
there.
Number 3. Air service to the island started pretty late. the first commercial flight ever to land on the island was in May 2017, and regular service began in October of that year.
So I guess maybe it's small. Well, with what did you say? 5,000 people.
5,000
live
people.
there?
Yep.
Okay, so 5,000 people. So obviously it's not super big, and maybe it's kind of remote because that's a wow. 2017.
Yep.
Yeah, still not. No,
Okay.
not getting it.
The oldest resident on the island is named Jonathan, and he's 187 years old.
Wait, did you say 187? Like nearly a double centenarian?
That's right, 187 years old, because Jonathan is a giant tortoise.
Wow, that's so cool. That would be an interesting way to, think of places actually. The oldest non-human residents, but that is not helping me get closer. I don't know enough about animals, but tortoise has me thinking maybe this is the Galapagos.
Good guess.
No...
But it's kind of
there's no airport
kind of, and
there,
it's
right?
also kind of a trick clue because Jonathan is actually an immigrant. He's from the Seychelles Islands originally.
Okay, well, trick or not, I'm no closer to figuring this out.
Okay, here's a clue that might help you a bit. Another famous resident on the island was a French ex-politician. He retired there, but not exactly by choice.
Maybe Napoleon? Is it Elba?
Well, close. I mean, that was the first island he was exiled to, and he escaped. And it's also fairly distant from this island.
What is it called? Saint something. Saint Helena?
You got it. St. Helena. It's in the South Atlantic, 2,000 kilometers off the African coast and 4,000 kilometers east of Brazil, making it one of the most remote islands in the world. And the British exiled Napoleon here from 1815 until his death in 1821.
Yeah, I guess he couldn't really swim for it.
No, it would be a long swim. I mean, the first landings on the island were by Portuguese sailors, and also that the Spanish, Dutch, and British ships stopped there a lot, and it became a common stopover for ships traveling between Europe and Africa and Asia. And the British then granted the island to the East India Company in 1657, and they started settling it and fortifying it the next year. And then it became a crown colony in 1834, and then in 1981 it became part of a British overseas territory that also includes Tristan da Cunha and Ascension Island. Now, after the Suez Canal opened and later the Panama Canal, shipping routes changed a lot, so St. Helena kind of took a back seat. And also because it didn't have air travel for so long, it hasn't really been a hotspot. But the air link helps, and in the tourist industry, they really capitalize on Napoleon's imprisonment there.
So are there, what do you do there? What do you do there besides be amongst 5,000 people?
Well, you can see Napoleon's place where he lived. I guess you could maybe visit Jonathan. And there are lots of other nature activities, too. Scuba diving, swimming with whale sharks, whale watching, bird watching. They have marine tours and hiking as well.
Okay. That sounds good, but I think I would always have it in the back of my mind that, what if I got stuck here in exile? That ghost of Napoleon, I think, looms large.
Well, he didn't have the option of getting on an airplane to fly out of there. But I think it sounds like a cool, off-the-beaten-track sort of place to go. I think it would be neat to go there someday.
All right. Well, Gilligan's Island and St. Helena. What a trip. We're headed back on board now and setting sail for another port. Join us next week for another great Island Watch adventure.
In the meantime, follow us on Twitter at IslandWatchCast. Send us an email at islandwatchpodcast@gmail.com. And check out our website for show notes and more at islandwatchpodcast.com. fair winds and calm seas. This has been a production of Phosphine League.
Phosphine League.
Phosphine League.
Phosphine League.